Intelligence without strategy is merely performance art for the mediocre masses who confuse education with wisdom and information with power. Brilliant people fail constantly, not because they lack mental capability, but because they think in ways that leave them vulnerable to those who understand human nature's darker mechanics. They believe merit alone determines outcomes, that logic prevails in arguments, that fairness governs human interactions. These beautiful delusions cost them opportunities, relationships, and influence, while less intelligent but more strategic minds navigate around them effortlessly. Machiavelli understood what most never grasp. Human behavior follows predictable patterns rooted in self-interest, fear, and the hunger for status. Those who see these patterns clearly and act accordingly operate with advantages that raw intelligence cannot provide. The comfortable lies that society teaches about how the world works are designed to keep most people compliant and exploitable. Breaking free from these lies and adopting genuinely strategic thinking creates immediate separation from the 90% who remain trapped in naive frameworks that guarantee their subordination. See actions, ignore words completely. The fundamental error most people make is believing what others say rather than observing what they do. Humans are sophisticated liars, not necessarily from malice, but because they themselves believe narratives about their motivations that bear little relationship to their actual drivers. People construct elaborate self-stories that cast their behaviors in morally acceptable light, while their actions reveal the true motivations they cannot or will not acknowledge consciously. Machiavelli recognized that words are strategic tools used to manage perception, while actions reveal authentic intent that speakers often hide even from themselves. The psychological mechanism behind this gap between word and action is complex. People genuinely believe they act from noble motives, even when objective analysis reveals pure self-interest driving their choices. They claim commitment to principles while violating those principles whenever convenient. They express loyalty while simultaneously positioning themselves to betray. They declare honesty while continuously deceiving. These contradictions do not register in their conscious awareness because the human mind is extraordinarily skilled at constructing narratives that preserve positive self-image regardless of actual behavior. The strategic thinker develops the discipline to completely disregard stated motivations and explanations while focusing exclusively on behavioral patterns. This means watching what people do when they believe no one important is watching, noting what they actually choose when their choices carry real costs, and tracking whether their actions consistently align with their claimed values or regularly contradict them. The emotional challenge is that this observational approach reveals uncomfortable truths about people the observer might prefer to trust or respect. It means accepting that almost everyone is substantially different from their self-presentation. Most people cannot maintain this observational discipline because it requires abandoning the comforting belief that humans are generally honest about themselves. They want to believe that stated motivations are real, that people mean what they say, that verbal commitments have value. This desire for trust makes them repeatedly vulnerable to manipulation by those who understand that words are cheap while actions are costly. The strategic thinker accepts the loneliness that comes from seeing through everyone's self-presentation to the calculating self-interest that actually drives most human behavior. The advantage this creates is enormous because the person operating from observed behavior rather than stated motivation can predict actions that surprise others. They recognize when someone's words promise loyalty while their actions demonstrate they are preparing to defect. They see when claimed principles will be abandoned the moment maintaining them becomes inconvenient. They understand when expressed support is actually positioning for betrayal. This predictive capacity allows preemptive action that appears remarkably prescient to those who took words at face value and were subsequently shocked by actions that the strategic observer expected all along. Recognize that most people are controlled by fear, disguised as principles. The masses claim they make choices based on values, principles, and carefully considered beliefs about right and wrong. Machiavelli understood this is largely performance masking the actual driver, which is fear. People adopt socially acceptable positions not because they have reasoned their way to these conclusions, but because deviation carries social costs they are terrified to pay. They conform to consensus not from conviction, but from fear of exclusion. They accept authority not from respect, but from fear of consequences. They maintain relationships not from genuine affection, but from fear of isolation. The psychological mechanism operates largely beneath conscious awareness. People genuinely experience their fear-driven choices as principled decisions, because admitting to themselves that fear controls them would be intolerable to their self-image. The human ego constructs elaborate justifications for choices that fear actually determined. Someone avoids controversy not because they fear conflict, but because they possess nuanced understanding that sees merit in multiple perspectives. Someone maintains a draining relationship not because they fear being alone, but because they are loyal and committed. Someone accepts unacceptable treatment not because they fear retaliation, but because they are patient and understanding. The strategic thinker learns to identify fear operating beneath the surface of principled explanations. This means observing which stated principles people abandon when circumstances make adherence costly, and which principles they maintain regardless of personal cost. The principles that survive expensive circumstances are genuine beliefs. The principles that disappear the moment defending them becomes difficult or dangerous are fear management disguised as conviction. This distinction reveals what people will actually do under pressure versus what they claim they would do from the safety of hypothetical discussion. Most people never develop this capacity to distinguish genuine principle from fear-driven performance because it requires brutal honesty about their own motivations. Recognizing fear disguised as principle in others means first recognizing it in oneself, acknowledging the countless times one has claimed principled reasoning for choices that fear actually determined. This self-knowledge is painful enough that most people avoid it entirely, preferring to maintain comfortable delusions about their own integrity rather than confronting how much fear shapes their behavior. The strategic advantage of seeing through this disguise is that it allows accurate prediction of behavior under pressure. The person who understands that someone's stated principles are actually fear management knows exactly when those principles will be abandoned. When circumstances shift to make the feared consequence less likely or to make a different fear more salient, the person will immediately reverse positions while constructing new principled explanations for their reversal. The strategic observer expects and plans for this predictable abandonment, while others are shocked by the sudden reversal they failed to anticipate. Understand that gratitude dies quickly, fear endures. Most people believe that helping others creates lasting loyalty and appreciation. They invest resources in assisting people, expecting that gratitude will translate into reliable support. Machiavelli observed that this expectation is naive and costly. Gratitude is among the weakest and shortest-lived human emotions. The person helped may feel genuine appreciation in the moment of receiving assistance, but this feeling fades rapidly once circumstances stabilize. What remains is not warm gratitude, but often resentment that someone witnessed them in a position of weakness and dependence. The psychological mechanism behind gratitude's rapid decay involves ego protection. Being helped requires admitting need, accepting that one could not handle circumstances alone, and acknowledging dependence on another's generosity. These admissions wound pride. Once the crisis passes and the person no longer requires assistance, their ego begins reconstructing narratives that minimize how much help they actually received. They tell themselves the assistance was not really necessary, that they would have managed without it, that what they received was actually less valuable than initially appeared. This reconstruction allows them to avoid the uncomfortable feeling of owing someone. The strategic thinker understands that investing in others' gratitude is poor strategy. The returns are minimal and short lived. Far more reliable is positioning oneself so that others fear the consequences of opposing or abandoning you. Fear, unlike gratitude, does not decay with time, it intensifies with consistency. The person who maintains capacity to harm those who betray them finds that fear of this capacity keeps people aligned far more effectively than any amount of past assistance. This is not advocacy for cruelty, but recognition that strategic positioning requires ensuring that others understand betrayal carries costs that make it unattractive. Most people resist this understanding because it conflicts with how they want to believe relationships work. They prefer the story that kindness generates loyalty, that helping others creates lasting bonds, that generosity is rewarded with reciprocal commitment. These beautiful lies feel morally superior to acknowledging that relationships maintained by fear are often more stable than those supposedly based on gratitude. The emotional resistance to this truth keeps most people investing in strategies that consistently fail to generate the loyalty they expect. The practical application is not to stop helping others, but to recognize that help alone does not create reliable allies. The person helped must also understand that betrayal would carry consequences, that opposing someone who once helped them would not be cost-free. This understanding need not involve threats or aggression, but simply maintaining position and capability that makes clear one is not someone who can be safely betrayed. The strategic thinker ensures that gratitude is reinforced by calculation, that the helped person's emotional appreciation is supported by rational recognition that maintained alliance serves their interests better than opposition. Accept that fairness is fiction designed to keep you compliant. Society relentlessly teaches that fairness should govern interactions, that merit determines outcomes, that justice prevails in the long run. These teachings serve a specific function, which is maintaining order by keeping people compliant with systems that exploit them. Machiavelli understood that the powerful promote belief in fairness because it keeps the powerless waiting patiently for rewards that will never arrive rather than taking action to seize what they want. The person who internalizes these teachings about fairness operates with severe disadvantage against those who recognize that outcomes are determined by power, not by desert. The psychological appeal of believing in fairness is powerful because it provides comfort in the face of inequality and injustice. The person who achieves less than they deserve can tell themselves that eventually fairness will prevail, that their merit will be recognized, that patience will be rewarded. This belief allows them to tolerate unacceptable circumstances without taking action to change them. They wait for the system to correct itself, for the right people to notice their worth, for fairness to manifest. This waiting is precisely what those benefiting from the unfair system want, because it prevents challenge to arrangements that serve the powerful at the expense of everyone else. The strategic thinker recognizes that fairness is not a law of nature, but a social construct unevenly applied to serve those with power to determine what counts as fair. Outcomes are determined by strategic positioning, by understanding how power operates, by willingness to act in self-interest rather than waiting for someone else to deliver what one deserves. This recognition feels cynical to those raised on fairness narratives, but it is simply accurate observation of how human systems actually function versus how people claim they should function. Most people cannot abandon belief in fairness because doing so requires accepting responsibility for their circumstances. As long as they believe in fairness, they can attribute their lack of success to the system's failure to recognize their merit. Abandoning this belief means acknowledging that waiting for fairness to deliver results is a strategy that will never work. That change requires taking action regardless of whether that action aligns with comfortable notions of fairness. This shift from passive waiting to active pursuit feels morally uncomfortable, but it is the shift that separates those who achieve what they want from those who spend lives feeling underappreciated. The practical application is not to become unfair or unjust, but to stop allowing belief in fairness to constrain strategic action. The strategic thinker pursues their interests decisively, while others remain paralyzed by concerns about whether their actions are fair. They position themselves advantageously, while others wait to be offered positions they deserve. They create opportunities, while others wait for opportunities to be fairly distributed. This difference in approach produces dramatically different outcomes, with the strategic actor accumulating power and position, while the fairness believer accumulates resentment about systems that never delivered the fairness they expected. Master, appearing harmless while building power. The most dangerous strategic error is displaying one's strength, ambition, and capabilities openly. Machiavelli recognized that those who show their power attract opposition, that those who reveal their ambitions invite sabotage, that those who demonstrate their capabilities trigger envy. The masses are taught to value authenticity and transparency, to show their true selves, to be open about their goals and abilities. This teaching serves those already powerful by ensuring that emerging threats identify themselves before accumulating enough power to challenge established positions. The psychological mechanism behind this dynamic involves how humans respond to perceived threats. When someone displays capability and ambition openly, others who might be disadvantaged by that person's success begin acting to prevent that success before it materializes. They form alliances against the threat. They work to undermine the ambitious person's efforts. They spread information that damages reputation. This opposition emerges not because the ambitious person has done anything wrong, but simply because their potential success threatens others' relative positions. The strategic thinker learns to appear less capable, less ambitious, and less threatening than they actually are. This means downplaying achievements, disguising ambitions behind modest goals, and presenting capabilities in ways that do not trigger defensive responses from potential competitors. The appearance of harmlessness allows accumulation of power, while others fail to recognize the threat until position is secure enough that opposition can no longer prevent success. This is not deception in any immoral sense, but strategic management of others' perceptions to prevent premature opposition. Most people cannot adopt this approach because it conflicts with needs for recognition and validation. They want others to acknowledge their capabilities, to appreciate their ambitions, to recognize their potential. This need for external validation drives them to display strength in ways that immediately trigger opposition from those who recognize the threat. The strategic thinker accepts delayed recognition, understanding that premature visibility is more costly than temporary anonymity. They find satisfaction in actual progress toward goals rather than requiring recognition of that progress from others who might oppose them if they understood what was being built. The practical application involves carefully calibrating what information is shared about one's capabilities, resources, and objectives. The strategic thinker shares enough to maintain social relationships and avoid appearing secretive, but withholds critical information about true capacity and ultimate aims. They allow others to underestimate them, to dismiss them as less capable or ambitious than they are, understanding that this misperception provides enormous strategic advantage. When they eventually reveal capability and achieve objectives, the revelation comes too late for effective opposition, leaving competitors stunned by success they never saw coming because the strategic actor carefully managed the information that might have allowed early intervention.